Good afternoon and welcome to Match Day. I'm Vince and we have Ian and with us today, very special guest his name is Beau Dure. Beau has covered soccer for 2 decades. He's written 4 books, hundreds of stories for USA Today, The Guardian, ESPN, 442, and as of late with more with Soccer America. Beau has carved out some time. He also has a podcast, which we'll promote, right? It's called The Ranting Soccer Dad. Is that correct?
The podcast has been kind of dormant lately. I tend to get impatient and just try to, I either try to send it out to someone who actually is paying me for it. I was going to say I'd write for Soccer America for free, but please don't tell them that. But I get impatient if I have a thought in my head, I want to spin it out on the blog rather than audio editing. So
Sure.
I'm doing the podcast much lately.
Thank you for joining us. We're gonna kind of just dive in, but just real quick, we always try and get everybody's kind of like journey, right? And how'd you end up also in writing soccer, right? So how'd you just real quick, a little summary of your journey, please.
I was at one time the best U12 center back in Athens, Georgia. That's not saying a whole lot. I played for the Athens Applejacks. I'm sorry to say that name no longer exists. They're now Athens United, and didn't play in high school because I was a runner, and I did that instead. So I kicked myself over that. Followed it a lot in college. I was at Duke when they launched the women's soccer team, so that was my first exposure to women's soccer because my high school was too small to have a girls' soccer team at that point. And actually, we had girls who played with boys at various times there, just because there weren't any other things there. Then, over the next decade, I basically watched wherever I could, and you probably remember there were very syndicated A-League games. ESPN would occasionally show things. They wound up settling on like a Monday Night Football sort of thing where they would take the Monday afternoon Premier League game and play it there. So, and, I covered it a little bit. The times I've been in sports departments, which was most of the time, I've been sort of the champion of sports that aren't getting enough coverage. And at times that was women's basketball. That was women's basketball at Duke, and soccer generally, and especially, I spent a lot of time at newspapers that were fairly hostile to
Right.
soccer in general, and didn't believe that the sport had any place in the U.S. landscape.
Yep.
To be honest, I found that a little bit at USA Today as well. I had people, I had an editor really looking out for me. It was a female editor saying I should write less about women's soccer, and she was trying to steer me toward writing, NFL and NBA, and she was looking out for me because she saw more of a future in that. And actually, if you look at my most recent tax returns, she was probably right. But then at USA Today, I had a variety of jobs there. I had some behind the scenes, boring technical stuff. A lot of online production. I was their first mixed martial arts beat writer. So did a ton of things there, and soccer was always sort of the thing that was closest to my heart, and that's what I wound up writing the most when I left USA Today, so that I could have family time and coach my own kids. So I was lucky. If I'd stayed at USA Today, I probably wouldn't have had the opportunity to do that because there was so much weekend work. But then a lot of work at ESPN, mixed with for the first year, writing a lot of books, and then landing, I've been a victim of places that have had to, slash their budgets. 442 was a great place to write. They slashed their U.S. operations, which was a real shame. But Soccer America, I remember reading when I was at Duke, and that was the only place you could get soccer information in those days. And it came into the library where I was working. And so I would always, be putting out the magazine, say, oh, there's a new one. And so, snag it for myself and read it. So that's my journey.
No, that's great. Boy, a lot of memories came back for me too, right? When you were talking. I
forgot Soccer Made in Germany, the great show from PBS.
Charles, on PBS,
right.
By the way, on PBS. They cleverly took 90 minutes and packaged it in 60.
Mm-hmm.
It was brilliant. Loved
It
it.
was. Yeah.
And it was seamless. I remember in Indianapolis here where I live, it was on Sunday afternoons. And my buddies and I would sit around the black and white and we'd watch. No, I never forget. I was a high school coach at a private Catholic school, and the AD was the football coach. This was in the early '90s, and I walked in the door, and he called me a communist, and because I was coaching a communist sport. And why am I taking away all his athletes? I mean, we've come a long way from that, which is great. Don't get me wrong; he was a wonderful man. He was actually joking most of the time. But Ian, you said you have a question.
Yeah, I've put it on the chat box, the Ranting Soccer Dad website, and it's probably a very appropriate title for a lot of our coaches who most recently coaches seem to have a bigger problem with parents than they do with referees, which I think is interesting. But the most recent article,
I'm a referee
which I was
now,
reading,
so.
yeah, the most recent article about the women's national team and the court case and everything. When I read that, your efforts to try to keep a very balanced perspective and do a pros and cons is pretty remarkable, given how polarized certainly the fan base are and the constituents. I'm not suggesting that Soccer America is as polarized or your writing is, but how do you maintain that? How do you go and try to see both sides of the story? So when we have the disappointment of not qualifying for the Men's World Cup, how do you find the obviously the disappointment of that, but then try to find silver lining? How do you make that balance?
Well, some of the balance comes from being sort of an old school journalist where, I was raised on objectivity and giving credence to both sides. I learned later in life that a lot of the times the two sides weren't necessarily equal, but still the idea is to give preeminence to the facts. And so in the soccer writing that I do, it's a little bit frustrating because there are a lot of women's soccer advocates, fans, and journalists. And these days, the state journalism is in. You have a lot of kind of fan journalists who have worked their way into positions of influence, and they aren't from that tradition. They want to see one side, and sometimes they do a pretty good job, and sometimes. It's not a bad thing necessarily to have someone who's writing from the point of view of an advocate. To some extent, I feel like I'm writing from the point of view of an advocate too. I went to, just as a fan, I went to the 1996, Women's Olympic final, which was fantastic. I went to the 1999 USA-Germany World Cup quarterfinal, which it was a fantastic game. People forget the U.S. was down 1-0 and then 2-1 at the half in that game. So that 2 goals in the second half changed a lot of history. So I don't think that I think my credibility in women's soccer should be fairly high, but some people don't see it that way because I take the other side. And it goes back to, I take both sides, as you say, because in this case, there really are both sides. The women have historical mistreatment to point to. The U.S. soccer has done very well in a lot of respects. They've certainly taken women's soccer more seriously than a lot of countries have, but they've also just lowballed them and given them, labor negotiations that were utterly insulting. It took people like Julie Foudy to kind of fight back on that, push back on that. I think the issue now, though, is that if the U.S. women had won $66 or $67 million, which was what their economist said they were due, U.S. soccer would have to cut programs, and even before the cuts they've had to make with COVID-19. I think that they were planning to spend their asset pile down. People say, "Oh, well, they have $162 million in assets." No, they don't anymore. Unfortunately, U.S. soccer has not taken the PR offensive to say, here's what we're doing with that money. I have to go through line by line in the budget and figure out where it's going. And some of it's going to coaching education. Some of it's going to technology, which actually sort of goes in hand with that. Yep. And some of it is going to grant programs. And so, they're doing, you can tell that they're doing a few things that are worthwhile. They probably want to do more. And if they pay $67 million to the women, well, that cuts into it. It also would make it more difficult. The men are playing on an expired collective bargaining agreement. They've been playing without a deal for 16 months. The women's deal is up at the end of 2021. Imagine negotiating toward the end of 2021 when the other side has just spent $67 million in back pay to people who aren't going to be, and you have to bear in mind, these are people who are not going to be part of the national team program for much longer. Carly Lloyd is pushing 40. Megan Rapinoe, who I think has played better in her 30s than she did in her 20s, still, if you look at the stats, she ran the least of any field player. It was Jill Ellis's brilliance that made her as effective as she is. But they, so when you look at the future, the deals that they were making in 2000 when Julie Foudy and Mia Hamm stood up to them, that was about the future. This lawsuit isn't about the future. They don't rewrite the deal if they win. If they win, they get a pile of money to the people who've come before. And so that's a balance they have to strike. And what I'm told is, well, it's influential because if they win, it will inspire a lot of little girls. I have looked at it from the point of view, and I don't mean to brag here, it's more of disappointment. I feel like a lot of people don't look at it from the point of view that if you want to care about the little girls, you have to leave some money for them going forward.
Yeah. So that's a lot to bite into, and the article, which again I put on there, is really worth the read because I read it twice already, and I'm still not sure I quite understand it, which is a reflection of my reading ability and comprehension ability, but also the nuance. Yeah, this is a much slightly more global question. It seems to me with the new general secretary, a new president, and then the situation that has been forced on the entire world, there's an opportunity almost for the new general secretary and the new president they've almost got kind of a clean slate. How do you see the federation's sort of positioning coming out of the global crisis?
Well, they've certainly hit the reset button, and they've had to. When I ran through the budget, and in the wake of the staff cuts that they made, and of course they let go two really top executives, in Brian Remedy and Tanya Wallach. Some of those cuts, though, were really not to save money. Some of them may have been the CEO looking to bring in his own people. Some of them, hard to say why. Those cuts, I think, were anticipatory. Their bottom line is not that bad right now. And one thing to remember, the typical national team game loses money. It's the sponsorship that comes in that makes up the bulk of it. And of course, we don't know what those sponsors are going to be paying. I mean, there are minimum amounts that they're supposed to pay, but we haven't seen the contracts. We don't know if there's some sort of force majeure clause in there that would let them out so that they don't have to pay as much. And if they don't have to pay as much, well, that's the bulk of U.S. soccer's income. They may also lose out on registration fees, but that's only about $6 million. I mean, if youth can't play this fall, the registration fees to U.S. soccer will be the least of the negative outcomes from that, of course. So I think these cuts, they were expecting more fallout from COVID-19 or putting it in there just in case. And putting it in there just in case, they were going to have to pay a ton of money to the women, and they probably still will. I think we're still going to be looking at an 8-figure settlement just because it's not going to do anybody any good. I think U.S. soccer would probably win if however long this case goes. Nobody wants this to go 2 or 3 more years.
Right.
Yeah, that was very clear in your article. It's interesting because U.S. youth soccer has a new CEO, fairly coincidental with this crisis too. So it's almost a perfect storm of almost there's going to be a renewal for the soccer community coming out of this. Some enforced on us, but there's some new people in the space now, like Skip Gilbert, like the new leadership at US Soccer. So assuming our association can continue to keep the doors open and the lights on, I'm actually quite excited to see what the opportunities will be. Vince, over to you. Sorry.
No, this has been wonderful. By the way, there's a random question in the chat box. He wants to list the top 3 must listen.
Let's listen to soccer podcasts. Well, I actually, a lot of my listening is going back and listening to SiriusXM. So I go back and listen to, Counterattack, Tony Meehan, Brian Dunseth, and United States of Soccer with Jason Davis.
Mm-hmm.
I do listen to, and I can't believe the name is, Total Soccer Show, Daryl Grove and Taylor Rockwell. That's one that pops up. Also, one I want to toss in that is, I think, the definitive podcast on women's soccer, and that's called The Mixed Zone, mixed with two X's. It's done by Jen Cooper, who uses the alias The Keeper. So she has a web presence called Keeper Notes, and she does a fantastic job. She is a walking encyclopedia of women's soccer. She does trivia challenges with herself and Dan Laletta, and I stand nowhere near them because they would clean my clock. They know things way deeper than I do. If you wanted to ask them, what's the 2014 starting 11 for the Western New York Flash, they probably know it. So that's a great podcast to listen to.
Oh, thank you. So I just have, we're already over time, which is great. But I remember you wrote an article, or you said a tweet, and I remember I tweeted back, thank you very much. It was when you commented on the F license, and because I wrote the F license and did it, and right. I just appreciated that tweet. I just want to let you know I appreciate it because there's a lot of work that went into that. And so somewhat related, but your book, why the men will never win the World Cup. Mm-hmm. Do you think it has some relationship to coaching education, and is it related? For example, now they have play, practice, play, which is fine, right? It's getting kids to play and learning the game in a more dynamic setting environment, which is fine. Do you think it's related? Just curious.
I think so.
Or something else.
I think so. And you look at, the first exposure people have to soccer is going to be through people like me, a parent. You're not going to see a professional coach, at least not outside the occasional clinic or a little side session, until you're about 8 or 7, 8, even 9 years old. Yeah. So you're going to start with people like me. And we were told, well, first you do it this way. Oh, okay. Now we have this thing where you do a warm-up, small-sided game, expanded small-sided game. I never understood what the difference was between those two, and a scrimmage. And so you do a bunch of squiggles on a sheet of paper to show what your plan is. I mean, I made fun of that in one of my presentations at your convention. So we were taught to do that, and then we were taught to do play, practice, play. Now, play, practice, play, I loved. When I started doing that as a coach, it was much simpler. I think it really helped kids stay engaged. I felt like I wasn't running around setting up cones as much as I had been. So that was good, but it just means that, in my short time, a decade of coaching, I had 3 different approaches to learn.
Yeah. No, it's perfect. And just just so you know, I had a version of play, practice, play in the F, but it was taken out because at the time it didn't match the E and the D. So right, but it's fine. It's great. So at least it's now in, and it's perfect for, I think, the especially the younger ages. Just get them going, and it's much easier too for a coach to just throw a child in a pickup game, in a little game, as opposed to stopping an activity and saying, "Oh, here's what we're doing." So it's much easier, and it's
interesting hearing your frustrations, Beau, because over the years, these methods or whatever, they've been presented as exclusive, like you must do it this way. And then a new regime comes in, and no, we certainly don't want to take, we don't want to have anything to do with the old one. So this is the new, and none of these methodologies are exclusive, right? There may be days when you go out and you do something progressively. There may be other days where you're smart with a small-sided game. There may be days where you don't have opponents in the training session. But unfortunately, a lot of different coaching cultures have made them. It's one way. The terms never or always are too readily applied when they shouldn't be. I got a quick question. Have you ever read the book Miracle of Castel de Sangro?
Yes, I have. Okay. I won't spoil the shock ending.
My most favorite soccer book of all time, and I've actually been to the town, and they gave me a shirt. In terms of soccer reading, is there anything you're reading now, fiction or nonfiction?
I just read the book, and it was one of the presentations I went to at your convention again. It was by the folks who do it was Patrick Seth Taylor, I believe his name, works with Patrick Ianni, wrote a book called On Frame, and it's very general. And a lot of books like that, they're not geared toward people like me who've been researching these things for a while. They're geared toward new parents, and so if I were running a soccer club, I'd absolutely want to hand that out to one of my parents, and that was where I came up with that. There's one thing to point out with women's soccer, and that is there was a spate of memoirs that came out over a period of time. I think the one that got overlooked and shouldn't be was Abby Wambach's, because Abby had just suffered humiliation. She was arrested, and she came out of that very reflective. And she wrote the most candid book. She talked about how in high school she didn't care about school because she knew that she was going to be playing college soccer and getting a scholarship. And these are things that she wouldn't really recommend. So I think that was the one that a reader would get the most out of. I can't recommend that one enough.
That's a good shout out, because I think a lot of people are looking at things to read and things to watch on television. There's been some of the soccer documentaries out of Great Britain I've been enjoying. And then there's the fictional, or not fictional, but the Damn United, which is about Leeds United of the 70s,
right?
Which is a great book and is a great movie too. So we've been touting some of the Netflix and some of the books as well. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
No, thank you. And Beau, thank you so much. We've gone 6 minutes over. Again, just want to say thank you for your time, and because I know you're really extremely busy.
You don't want to know what I've been doing this afternoon.
Okay, never mind that. And by the way, our Match Day Supporters Club, that's a contingent of one. He said another great listen today. So thank you so much, Coach Barker. I'll leave it with you.
Sam's Army started with one, so we can start with our own fan club. I don't think we're ever going to be the Men in Blazers in any capacity, so that's okay. We won't be losing our roots or selling out. We'll be good.
Thank you. So tomorrow, just so everyone knows that dares to come on, we have Dr. David Carr, who's going to talk about the Ohio University Master's Program in soccer coaching. And then we're also going to have Mr. Ian Barker. That's going to be in place of Jeff Muir's presentation on tactical awareness training. So Mr. Ian Barker is going to be presenting tomorrow afternoon. So, Beau, thank you so much. And if we can help, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.